Welcome, everyone. I understand we are starting now, slowly. I see some attendees coming into the room. And yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. Maybe let's go ahead and start with some introductions. So my name is Hilal. My pronouns are she, her. I work for Choice for Youth and Sexuality, which is a youth-led organization based in the Netherlands. And my role there is resource mobilization coordinator. So it's also one of the reasons why I'm here today, co-facilitating this webinar. I'm very excited to be here with you for this workshop. And I will give the floor to my colleague, Corinne, who's with me today to co-facilitate.
Well, co-facilitate, you are the star of this webinar, I think, Hilal. Hello, everyone. My name is Corinne, one of the advocacy coordinators at Choice for Youth and Sexuality, and helping out Hilal with a few bits here. Choice advocates for meaningful youth participation in decision-making and youth bodily autonomy. And we hope to share some useful insights today on fundraising, on youth-friendly fundraising specifically, and how you can think like a donor to be successful in your fundraising. So back to you, Hilal, to start with the sharing.
Yes, thank you very much. And before I start sharing my screen and going for it, I would like to also call everyone to please share in the chat your name, where you're from, which organization you're coming from. And yeah, we would love to just keep this as an open space for conversation today. So throughout the session, please feel free to engage in the chat, and ask any questions there. I will go ahead and share my screen and walk you through our agenda for the day. There we go. Yes. As you can see, we titled our session "Capacity Building and Fundraising: A Practical Workshop" because our objective is really to keep it practical and for you to leave this room today with hopefully some helpful takeaway points that you can use in your own fundraising efforts. This is actually the second workshop that we are organizing in collaboration with Global Queer Youth Network and Choice. We organized one just a month ago in October, and thankfully there were a lot of demand for this session, so we decided to organize it for a second time. So we're really grateful that you're here with us today, and I hope you're also willing to share your experiences because we hope to keep this space quite interactive and useful. So let me walk you through the agenda for the day. First, we will just in a minute use the Mentimeter platform to have some interactive questions. And we would like to get to know your funding experiences. So what kind of challenges or opportunities you have in your fundraising. So we will start with that. Following that, I would like to talk a bit about our work on youth-friendly funding and how we define youth-friendly funding as Choice. So I'll give you some information about that. Afterwards, we have two main pillars of the session, so to say. First one is the question of how to think like a donor. So we are going to together discuss this question because our goal for this session is to really deep dive into some practicalities that donors expect from grantees. And most of these requirements are quite difficult for youth organizations. So we would like to tackle this question together. And then the second pillar of the session will focus on fundraising strategy, which is part of many efforts that we can undertake in order to improve our internal capacity in our organization. So we are going to talk the why and the how of developing a fundraising strategy. And we also hope to have quite some time for questions. and closing the session with your participation. So yeah, we can get started with going to menti.com. My colleague Corinne will share the password in the chat as well, the code, sorry, but you can also see it on the screen. And in the meantime, I will also shift my screen so we can all look at menti.com together.
Yes, and this is where we would like to hear from you and about your experiences thus far with funding or grant writing. So the code is in the chat as well. Meanwhile, Hilal's opening the question.
Yes.
So if
Can
you
you
go
see the
to
full
Menti,
screen? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So if you go to menti.com and enter this code 28600685, then the first question is rating these statements for your organization or group, being having a large pool of different donors, governments, foundations, multilaterals, having a financially sustainable organization, and having a designated team or person working on fundraising, divided into disagree or agree. So having one donor even is of course great. Having a pool of different donors is very important because diversifying your funding, as it's called, is important for how independent you can be as an organization. This is something that as a youth organization we also face. We're quite dependent on one donor still. Even though we're a relatively big and well-funded youth organization, youth-led organization, there is an immense risk that comes with this, because if that one donor decides like, oh, we don't want to work with Joyce anymore for any reason, or SRHR and youth is no longer a priority for us, then we lose a very big chunk of our funding, and that will greatly impact the number of staff members that we currently have, the projects that we currently undertake, the advocacy work that we do, basically everything in the future of our organization. So taking funds from different donors, diversifying that, your pool of income, is very important for the sustainability of your organization. I see that people are starting to add their answers. So yeah, a large pool is a difficulty for more of you, I see. It's more on the disagree side. With that comes financially sustainable, which is also very difficult. Core funding is also an issue that is difficult for most of us. Personally, I also see that funding for lobby and advocacy activities, especially on our topics around SRHR and LGBTI rights, is very difficult and restricted in what you can actually do. And well, having a Hilal in your team, a resource mobilization coordinator, is definitely a privilege and usually not something that is a priority in small organizations. You're most likely focused on campaigning, doing advocacy work, doing outreach to your communities, and a designated person on fundraising is important, but quite difficult to find also. Hilal, is there any reflections on what you're seeing thus far?
No, I think that was very comprehensive. We have another sort of getting to know you question. So if you would like, we can move on to that one.
Yes.
Sure.
Please do.
Yes. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. So second question is what the main barriers are that you face in accessing funding, especially on your focus issues, LGBTI+ issues. open-ended question. So once we receive some answers here, I'd also like to open the floor to hear from some of you. If you want to share a bit more about what you're adding and what you face. So I'll give you some time to add here.
And maybe one addition I will make to the question is here you can think about both internal and external barriers that you face, meaning internal barriers could be about your organization, the capacity of your organization or the sustainability, and external barriers could be the barriers you you basically experience from donors or other funders.
Some interesting points are coming in. Too technical. Timelines for funding, not a priority. Application capacity. Youth focus not accepted. Yeah, the technicality is an issue we see a lot with youth-led partners. I think, for example, EU funding is you have to hand in a certain form according to a certain format, and it's just super complex, and oftentimes there are also certain restrictions on your organization, like you need to already have received a certain amount of funding, or you need to exist for a certain amount of years, which has to do with your experience. And yeah, obviously that's a difficulty for newer groups. That savior complex is an interesting one. Is there anyone from the attendees who would like to share a bit more about this? I think if you raise your hand, I can allow you to talk. I think if you go to participants, you're able to raise your hand. Is that correct, Oscar?
Yes, that is the case. If anybody would like to speak, you can raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom window, and I'll give you the opportunity to speak. You're also able to send in messages to the chat box if you'd prefer.
Yep. Yeah, and this meeting is recorded, but no need to turn on your camera, of course, if you don't want. And if you feel more comfortable, please also share in the chat. Yeah, I see someone in the Q&A shared not to share in a panel. That's okay. We will also provide our contact details if you want to have a more personal consultation with us or to share anything. Timelines of funding are also shared here. Funding history, yeah, indeed. Sometimes all you need to get started is a Spark grant, where there are limited restrictions on your organizational abilities and history to just get started and create some of that funding history for you, which is also something that we try to do as Choice. Maybe Hilal, you can explain a little bit more about this.
Yes, indeed. I think this is, of course, very much dependent on the status of your organizing. For example, when we had some of the responses for registration for this event, we saw many inputs about some organizations not being legally registered organizations, but more like unregistered groups are organizing, which is a very, I think, natural form of civil society organizing, yet very much underfunded in the sector. So depending on whether you have registration in your country or not, there are many different funding opportunities that are available. Especially now, there is like a momentum in the development sector where we see more funding shifting from let's say high income countries to low and middle income countries. So maybe with that trend, this is a good time to also check out some new funding calls that are specifically for funding SRHR or youth or LGBTI+ issues for unregistered groups. And for registered organizations, maybe I can share a tip that we are also trying to follow now as Choice, that you can always take a partnership approach. So rather than applying for funding calls as a standalone organization, you can always seek to create a consortium or any other kind of partnership with other organizations. And we hope that it will also increase our chances of getting funded from donors. So maybe in a nutshell, that is something that I can share. And yes, Corinne, thank you for sharing our contact info in the chat. We would love to hear from you after the session as well about this.
Yes, indeed. For those listening and not able to see the chat, Quirin at choiceforyouth.org or Hilal, a bit easier to spell that one, Hilal at choiceforyouth.org. If you want to share anything or ask anything confidentially, please feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, the amount of money that you receive as an organization could be a restriction. So that's also why working in partnership can really help. I was at a discussion in Parliament, in Dutch Parliament, a few days ago, where a politician shared that in the future, the Dutch intersex movement runs the risk of no longer being able to receive funding from the Dutch government for their international efforts because of that limitation, because they're under 5 million euros and you need to spend more than 5 million somehow to be able to receive that as an alliance, which is ridiculous in many ways and impacts our movement, which is often often runs on small groups with small budgets, but doing very impactful work. So working in alliances can help this obstacle, this unfortunate obstacle. I think that I'll give the floor back to Hilal to continue with your informative presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I will go back to sharing my presentation. There we go. Yes, and for anyone who joined us a bit later when we were doing the Menti, I will just go over the agenda again. So first, we talked about getting to know your funding experiences, our attendees in the room. Thank you so much for all your responses. And now I will move on to talking a bit about Choice's work on youth-friendly funding. So I don't think we invented the saying of youth-friendly funding, but this is a phrase that we use a lot at Choice. And what we mean by that is having, simply having more funding accessible and available to youth-led organizations around the world. And there are many ways that donors, funders, and the whole ecosystem can make that happen for youth-led organizations. So at Choice, I think it was since like 2019 that we have been very much like combining some of our advocacy work and fundraising work and trying to advocate for more accessible funding for youth. And as part of this work, I will mention two like initiatives or efforts that I would like to focus on today. So one of them is actually a recently launched initiative, which we are part of as Choice. So it is called We Trust Youth Initiative, as you can follow on the screen. This initiative was brought up by 5 youth-led organizations, including Choice. So you can see the names at the logos on the screen. We have Copper Rose from Zambia. We have Iyo Porqueno from Mexico, Green Girls Platform from Malawi, IYAFC registered in the US, and Choice registered in the Netherlands. So we, as 5 youth-led organizations, especially working on SRHR and gender equality, we are supported by SB 2030, which is Family Planning 2030. And yeah, we basically came together to both challenge and support youth-focused donors and international NGOs, because we identified, as many other activists in the field, a huge problem about donors and NGOs and the way that they partner, fund, or support young people. And we would like this very loaded and power-based relationship to be more intentional and be more equitable for all parties. Therefore, within this year, we launched this initiative, and in this umbrella, we are going to do actually 2 main things. So first is that as an initiative in November, actually this month, we issued a public challenge. So we are publicly challenging donors and NGOs to take specific and concrete action to improve the way they work with young people. And this is a very comprehensive challenge. It could be both small wins or big wins for everyone involved. But we would really like to see more equitable capacity building relationships, funding mechanisms, and many more of the problems that we identify. So the challenge is up for, as I said, donors and NGOs at the moment, and we hope they will sign up to take up the challenge until the end of the year. And then they will implement these actions within the coming 6 months. And the second pillar of this initiative is that we are going to create a practical problem-solving community. So this will bring together us as youth-led organizations, the donors and NGOs who took up the challenge, and we are going to build a collective space to talk about these challenges and some of the effective practices that they have actually. And yeah, I wanted to briefly mention this because I thought this was very relevant to what we're talking about today. And yeah, if you go to the website on the screen, wetrustYouth.org, you can see more information there. And if you follow us on social media, there might be also some opportunities that come up, especially for youth-led organizations to get involved in this initiative. So yeah, this is our most recent and I think so far the biggest effort that we've taken in advocating for youth-friendly funding. And before that, in 2019, we also published a very significant toolkit. So I would like to mention that a bit. And I believe you have seen this before. I think it was included in the webinar invite. So if you are familiar with this already, great. If you're not, I would highly encourage you to check it out online. It is called Investing in Youth Impact, a toolkit on funding for youth-led organizations. So this toolkit was published, as I said, in 2019, and it was back then launched during the Women Deliver conference. And right now it's available in English, French, and Spanish. And the toolkit brings together like a long-term research and interviews and surveys done with around 150 activists, organizations, and donors that work in the youth and SRHR community. I myself also find this toolkit very helpful because it is a toolkit for both youth-led organizations and donors. So everyone, I think, can find something helpful to take up from this toolkit. And I would like to briefly walk you through what you can find in the toolkit, and then you can see if it's helpful for you in your work. So the first thing that you can find in this toolkit is actually an overview of the donor landscape and the experiences of youth-led organizations navigating it. So what do we mean by this? The donor landscape is huge. So there are many, many different funding mechanisms and actors like governments, private donors, foundations, individual donors, and bilateral or multilateral organizations. So the list goes on and on. And in this toolkit, you can find an overview of what these donors are. So maybe you can also do your own little like donor mapping to see which ones you would like to prioritize in your fundraising. And what we also have is like, for example, the YP Foundation from India shared some of the experiences of youth organizations navigating this space, because it's a highly competitive and inaccessible space. And most youth-led organizations find reaching institutional donors, so it could be governments, bilateral, multilateral organizations that are grant makers. They found that space very difficult to access because not all, but most youth-led organizations are small in size, and they don't necessarily have, like you mentioned in the menti.com, they don't necessarily have a funding history or a large track record. So it is a landscape that is difficult to navigate. And related to this, the second thing you can find in the toolkit is some of the barriers that are faced by youth-led organizations in fundraising. And I think some of these barriers are already mentioned by you in your responses to the menti.com. These are versatile barriers that change, that vary according to the youth-led organization size and whether they are registered or not, etc. So I think whatever the size or history of a youth-led organization is, it is a really difficult effort to raise a diversified and large amounts of income. So you can maybe read more about this if you're interested, because it's, I think, good for relating to other organizations as well. And on a more optimistic and forward-looking lens, we also included some information about what donors can do better. So this is really, I think, interesting to share with funders. So here we have, like, I think around 4 main recommendations for donors, one of which being more youth-friendly funding models. So this could be very versatile. For instance, some foundations are now implementing participatory grant making, which has become a very large trend in the world of funding. However, it is still a handful of donors that implement those kind of participatory models, which put youth at the center or at the forefront of their grant making. So in the toolkit, we have some examples about these models, which I think very interesting. The second recommendation that we have for donors is indeed reducing the application burden. So you also mentioned that there is a lot of technicality when it comes to making these funding applications, a lot of technical language, a lot of track records, and like my colleague Karine mentioned, some proposals are so long, like 60, 80 page long applications, and it creates a huge burden on youth-led organizations who have limited capacity. Another recommendation is for donors to provide sustainable support. Of course, this first responds to the need for core funding, so more organizational and more long-term funding that our organizations need, but also to support youth-led organizations with other, let's say, intangible support, like capacity building, because donors always ask these like very elaborate financial reports from their grantees without providing the capacity building that is needed to actually complete that financial reporting. So that is just to give an example on what we mean by that. And the last one is, yeah, indeed, making connections. So donors have very large networks that they're part of. There are a lot of member-based donor networks in all the parts of the world, and they are very much connected to each other. So even if a donor is not able to fund an organization at that moment or within that grant cycle, they can always refer to other funders who might be interested, or maybe open some other doors to youth-led organizations, like connecting them to some events or online spaces to connect with others. So this is a bit of an overview of what donors can do better, hopefully. And in the last part of the toolkit, this is specifically for youth-led organizations. You can find a checklist to develop your own fundraising strategy. We also use this checklist in building our own fundraising strategy at Choice. And this is only a very small taster image of what it looks like. But I will come to this a bit later when I'm talking about more about fundraising strategy. But yeah, just a heads up that you can find this and actually use it in your own organization. Yeah, now I will go to the next part, but I would just like to stop and see if there are any questions from the audience. You can always put them in the chat, or or raise your hand to say something. If I don't hear anything, I will move on to the next slide. I think we're good. Okay. Now, we would like to talk about, as I mentioned in the introduction, we'd like to address the question how to think like a donor. So all these like barriers and challenges that we talk about, that you've also raised in the Menti, like putting ourselves in the shoes of a donor might be actually helpful to think what they expect from youth-led organizations, because we deal with a set of different requirements, eligibility, etc., when we are applying for funding. So maybe in order to see how we can improve our own practices in our organizations, we can think like a donor. So for this, I will invite you again to the menti.com. Maybe Queen, could you please share the code once more while I share my screen? Because we have one more question for you, which is an open-ended question. Yes, thank you so much. So you can go to menti.com and enter the code in the chat. And yeah, let us know if it doesn't work for you. Okay, great. Yes, let me first explain the question before you submit your answers. So in thinking like a donor, we would like to just do this little exercise with you. We can imagine that you inherited some money from your grandparents, let's say. So you have $1 million that you would like to grant to civil society organizations. So you are donors right now. And our question to you is, what would give you trust before granting that money to civil society organizations? So this is only to just get a taste of what you would expect as donors from your grantees. So I will just give you a minute to think about it. And oh, I already see an answer. Yeah, I'll just give you a minute. And yeah, please participate. Some really interesting answers are already coming in. Thank you for sharing. I see 4 people have shared with us so far. So this is already very helpful. I will just read through some of these answers. So someone shared a proven history of impact, which is indeed very valid. For instance, proof of previous initiatives that have been well received. Indeed, the history, the track record is very important. Seeing examples of the work the group is already doing. This is also related to that, I think. We have a proven history of impact and campaigns carried out by the organization. So I see a similar line of thinking between participants. Having feminist principles and has ability to efficiently utilize the budget given. That's an incredible answer, I think. Also, thank you for sharing the importance of feminist principles for you. We have knowledge of what support the organization has from larger or more established organizations. Indeed. I see some answers about being realistic. So having a realistic plan, realistic timeline and budget, which is equally important. We have a point about passion, which is great. So being passionate about the organizing that they are doing. Meeting some basic criteria, of course. So for instance, if we were to fund civil society organizations, we would like them to be youth-led and have feminist beliefs, which is incredible. We have another point about being realistic, having realistic goals. And I see in the chat a question on how to submit the answer. So maybe, yes, my colleague is sharing the link again. So I will give you a minute to connect and share your answer. We have more answers about some values, for instance, intersectional at every level, climate justice, disability rights, SRHR. I think that's beautiful and very important. We have an answer about strategy, which is indeed very important for donors. So to have solid strategies in place. For instance, if your organization is working on advocacy, having an advocacy strategy is equally important in that. Moreover, having a long-term goals set for your organization, having SMART goals. Indeed, I think they complement each other. Wow, this is incredibly helpful. I see one more answer. Strong programmatic and financial policies in place. Indeed. Yeah, this is great. And it's already creating an amazing base on what I wanted to say afterwards. Sharing the same purpose as you, indeed. So alignment of mission, values, and objectives is very important. So you cannot, of course, go to any donor with your project idea or proposal, but doing like a donor scoping and mapping of similar goals and similar mission is very important. There is also a really nice answer. Acknowledge your limits and be honest. That's incredibly important. And at Choice, we also sometimes talk about the importance of saying no, because we are in more of a powerless position when we're looking for funding, because we are the receivers and the donors are the givers in a sense. And that relationship can also create some burden. So we also like to identify some of the things that we want to say no sometimes. So set some boundaries for our organization. This is, like I said, incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for sharing. I believe there are no new answers coming. Let me also check the chat. I think it's all good. Yeah, someone asked, can we see the top ones again? Absolutely. I'm at the top now, so you can have an overview. And in a minute, I will continue with my presentation. Yes, and we are also able to share these materials with you after the session, both the slides and the Menti slides. Okay, incredible. I'm also taking some notes from your amazing answers. And with this, I will go back to the presentation and just try to wrap up what's been said here. So I hope this exercise was a bit clear to everyone. So we tried to understand how donors think, how they approach to grantees before they award money to them. So in this, for the sake of the presentation, like I tried wrapping up these points in 4 pillars. So maybe let's take a look at the first one, which is indeed, like you also mentioned, donors would require organizations to have sound financial and reporting procedures. This is like a non-negotiable for donors, and for us as youth-led organizations, it's very important to have these finances and resources available publicly. So maybe having your annual reports or financial statements available on your website. Maybe like our websites, they don't have to be super fancy or super comprehensive, but having one annual report, like recent annual report, could really make a difference for donors. And also some donors would ask for audited finances. So it's also important that you have, I mean, hopefully you have access to a similar auditing process and service. The second thing is, again, a very big concept. Transparency and integrity are indeed other values and practices that donors are looking for. So transparency is, again, indeed having your finances, your reports accessible, open, transparent, and available to everyone on your website, but also having maybe an integrity policy. For instance, if you have ever had an experience of like a misconduct, it could be a fraud, it could be theft, like, because these things also happen when working with some other stakeholders, other partners. So having these mechanisms in place to deal with such cases is very important to manage your risks. So maybe instead of integrity, we could also name it as risk management in our organization. And it's not easy to do, we know by experience, but equally important and always requested by donors. Third one is, like you said very extensively, showing impact. So showing a strong history of impact of the organizations or actors that you worked before. If you are working in a community or in a defined geography, what has been the impact that you generated there in a given timeline? So yeah, you've already said it, it's very important. And the last thing I wanted to mention here is, I think one of the participants also mentioned having SMART goals. And SMART stands for, maybe you've heard it before, it stands for different words. So each letter refers to a word. So I will explain that in a minute. And I think smart thinking is also very important when it comes to campaigning. So it was among the questions raised by one of the registered participants to this webinar on how to conduct fundraising campaigning. And in order to maybe make it more attractive to donors, it's equally important to think in a smart way. So what do we mean by that? I would like to share this image of SMART. This is from a resource mobilization toolkit by the Frida Fund. You can see the full name on the bottom of the screen. It's an incredibly helpful toolkit. And here they explain what we mean by it. So S standing for specific, M for measurable, A for attainable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. So overall, we have the SMART thinking or SMART perspective that we can apply to any fundraising efforts that we have, not only campaigns, but could be anything, proposals as well. So as for being specific, we, as grant seekers, we would like to have a clear idea of what we are raising the money for. What is our goal? Do we have certain targets, indicators, or objectives set out in our proposal or in our idea? Secondly, is it measurable? So if you're doing a campaign, it's very important to know what amount of money you want to raise, or if you're applying for a call for proposals, how much you think your project or your initiative is going to cost you. So you would have to have an idea of realistic budget, like you mentioned on Menti as well, and what kind of measurable impact are you going to have with this given budget. So again, having relevant targets and indicators could be really important for that. Third is attainable. So again, being realistic, like you said. So we would like to aim high, but we would like to also stick to realistic goals and achievable objectives that we can actually put in place. R stands for relevant. So this is, again, another component of the SMART thinking. And why is this amount of money, or why is this project relevant to your organization? So how does it align with your mission and vision? How do you make a relevance between the budget that you need and the activities that you are going to deliver? And finally, we have T for time bound. So having a realistic and defined timeline is very important for any fundraising initiative, I think, because it creates momentum and it creates urgency. So just to give an example, lately we have seen some specific call for proposals to respond to the COVID pandemic, because it is a very time-bound action that needs urgency. So we have seen some solidarity funds or urgent action funds that have been launched. So it's important to have that relevance and that timeline to the momentum, to the trend. Or if you're doing a fundraising campaign, always good to have a realistic start and end date for your campaign. That's what I had to say about the donor bit. Thank you so much for your contributions, because I think that those contributions made this topic much more meaningful. And let me check the time. Okay, I think we're doing good. I would like to move on to the next part of my presentation, and then we will also have some time for questions and open discussion, which I'm looking forward to. So I'm not gonna bore you with too much content. But the last part that we wanted to include in this session is developing a fundraising strategy for your organization. So, so far in the session, we actually talked about some external, like working with external conditions. For example, working with donor requirements. That's a very external space that we have little control over, unfortunately. So we are in this position that we always have to tailor our ideas and our proposals to the donor. And those are some external conditions that we currently have to adapt to and find some ways to overcome. And there could be also internal barriers coming to think about our own organizations. For instance, like my colleague Green mentioned in the beginning, having, for example, a designated person or team for fundraising in your organization. This is a very privileged thing indeed. Or having capacity to write proposals or to develop budgets Like these are all internal issues that we need to think about in our everyday work. And not all organizations have the same access to these opportunities. So we wanted to just give you like one practical advice, which is developing a fundraising strategy. And by strategy, what we mean is very versatile. It could be literally a one-pager statement for your organization, or it could be like a 5-page sort of strategy document that you would like to follow. It could be longer than that. It's totally up to you. And a fundraising strategy could be built, could be developed by the people who work for the organization, because you are the ones that know your organization the best. Or if you would like to consult with some external stakeholders who know you well, you can also maybe make this a more of a collaborative effort. So I would like to just mention the whys of having a fundraising strategy. The first thing is that a strategy could help you to identify your challenges and your opportunities. So for instance, when we as Choice started writing our fundraising strategy, the first thing we did was a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it is an analysis that you can do with your team in your organization to identify these external and internal challenges or more opportunities that you can grasp. And you can put this analysis in your strategy, and it will guide the direction that you want to go. And thinking of that direction you want to go, a strategy could help you to assign some targets and indicators. So this, I personally find this very tricky when it comes to fundraising, because fundraising is a very immediate work that you can set a target for the next year. For example, we would like to raise this amount of money. It could happen, it could not happen. So it's a bit tricky, but having those kinds of targets and indicators could really help you to move on with your fundraising efforts. So some indicators could be, for example, the number of proposals that you would like to submit in the coming year, the number of or the size of fundraising campaigns that you would like to run. So it varies from context to context. So you can set these targets for your organization in your strategy. And third thing is that essentially a strategy helps you to track your progress. So this is a bit tricky when it comes to working in a youth-led organization, because for instance, at Choice, we have a high turnover of staff. So staff could change quite quickly over time compared to some other organizations when you're working with youth very naturally. And a fundraising strategy could really help you to track that progress over the years. And it will also be an internal handover from person to person in your organization. So when someone comes to a new role in your organization, they will have this amazing overview of what has been done in fundraising so far and how you measure all of this. And overall, having a fundraising strategy could help you to systematize and sustain your fundraising efforts. That's the whole idea of having a strategy. And when we're also talking about it, I'm curious to hear if your organizations have a fundraising strategy or a similar document or a process. So feel free to please respond in the chat if you have one, or if you find this information helpful. And one last thing I would like to mention related to this is give you a very simple template for a fundraising strategy. And it is really simple. It only has 4 components. And this is just to visualize what I've been trying to explain. So if you think of the strategy on a Word document, what you would find in it, ideally, is an introduction and internal review of your organization. So in this first part, you can paste that SWOT analysis that you've done. So what are the challenges and opportunities that you see in your organization, and a review of where you are at right now, your annual budget, for instance, or any other relevant information. Secondly, you can have a section on the state of fundraising. So where are you now? Who are your donors or donor? Or if you do not have a funder at the moment, then write that down on that paper. So what are your streams of income? Do you have any individual donors? Do you have any private foundations that you're linked to? So you can put that overview here, which is again very helpful for handover in an organization. The third section could be your fundraising goals. So looking at the state where you're at, where do you want to go? What are your fundraising goals? What are your targets and indicators, if you have any? So here, this is the place where you would like to say, for example, as Choice, our main fundraising goal, the overarching goal, is to diversify and increase our income. So that means we would like access to more donors, a number of donors, and we would like to access more income for our organization to implement our project ideas. It could be anything. This is very context specific, so you can fill in this part with your teammates. And the last part of the fundraising strategy could be an action plan. This could be a very simple table. And you can here identify the next steps for your fundraising strategy. So looking at the direction you want to go, what are you going to do about it? What are the concrete steps that you would like to do? And what I find very helpful is to also assign responsible people for each of those actions. So if you have teammates who are also working on fundraising with you, you can like do some division of labor. And for instance, if you would like to maintain a relationship with a donor, that could be one or two persons' responsibility to lead that communication. It could be another person's responsibility to develop budgets and write the proposal and then get it reviewed by other colleagues. So this is, again, very much specific to your organization, but it helps to have that action table. And it would be very helpful to you if all of this happens in a defined timeline. So you could say, okay, I'm gonna apply this fundraising strategy for the year of 2022 to 23. So it's a 2-year strategy, and this is what we're going to do for the next 2 years. It could be shorter than that or longer than that. You are the ones who would decide it. But overall, this is just to give you a very simple idea of what a fundraising strategy could look like. And again, going back to the toolkit resource that I mentioned before, the Choice Toolkit, in the last part of the toolkit, you can find a checklist. It's called the Fundraising Strategy Checklist. And there, maybe you can print that. And if you would like to develop your own strategy, you can like check your boxes as you go and take that as a resource. This was all I wanted to say about fundraising strategy. Let me stop there and also stop sharing my screen. And first, I would just like to ask Corinne or Oscar if you have any additions to the content or any remarks that you want to share with the participants.
I'm just going to unmute myself for a second, maybe. Hello, everyone. Oscar here. I am the consultant for youth with ILGA World and the Global Queer Youth Network. Just to let you know that I will be sharing all of the information that's been shared here today, including the slides and everything that we've had in case anybody wants to review it. I'll also be sharing all of the contact information for everyone that's been speaking today. And you're very welcome to get in touch with any one of us about any of this or any other questions that you might have, or even just thinking about collaborating and partnering in the future. We're always happy to interact with as many young people as humanly possible. So I shall pass over to Corinne now.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. And thank you, Hilal. I think this was very insightful. I hope useful. Yeah, nothing to add for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have 15 more minutes, right? So we can have, yeah, we do, perfect. yeah, we would like to actually open the floor to you, our attendees who would like to share any questions, but doesn't necessarily have to be a question. You can also just raise your hand and share what you think about the content, or share some of your experiences in your organization. So yeah, please feel free to engage through the chat or raise your hand, and we can give you access to unmute yourself. Okay, I see a hand raised. Yes. Vashti, I hope I pronouncing that right. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. I learned so much. Just a little, maybe a question for everyone, and maybe like share also the experiences on how to do away with this concern. Because, for example, working with marginalized groups of young people in all of their diversity requires a specific accessibility, right? And accessibility fund or investment to accessibility fund can be costly. And sometimes sometimes we use the term efficient. We have to utilize the budget efficiently. And with that efficiently, it is actually very ableist in a way, because it restricts specific bodies to participate, and therefore the advocacy is futile, right? So I think, because based from experience, we learned that accessibility funds are costly, and it is not being accommodated by funders. So maybe there are best practices, shared experiences, especially that to note that there is this seemingly scarcity of donors, especially from regions or locations in the global south, in the Philippines, where I'm from. So it's really, that's why there's a discussion on, sometimes setting boundaries can be difficult. I can't even have that, because you have to appease the donor or the grant, the one who gives the grant, because you're all competing for a specific grant, right? So yeah, I'm just stop there.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing and for flagging this super important issue. We couldn't even come to discuss all of these more specific requirements that other groups might need. And indeed, the space is so ableist, as you mentioned. It could be really difficult to make it available and accessible to your stakeholders or to your target groups. Maybe coming to talking about making the spaces more available to all bodies and everyone to participate. I was wondering, Queen, is there any kind of recommendation or observation you could share with us? Because my colleague Queen participates in global advocacy spaces quite a lot. So I wonder if there are any global discussions or conversations around this.
Well, I have to disappoint you in that regard. My expertise is not on the disability issues. Of course, there is an overlap with SRHR. There is an overlap with LGBTI issues. What we are trying to do is to bridge movements. So, yeah, if not for disability specifically, or for young LGBTI with a disability, then perhaps there is an overlap that you can find with other movements to find partnerships with, well, maybe not the obvious partner. So perhaps there is not even an NGO, but a care provider, or even private sector entities that you could partner up with, or a sex worker organization, an HIV organization, different types of movements or organizations where the target group and beneficiaries might overlap with yours, and that you could still come up with a joint project together, which will then expand at least part of your funding so that you can slowly grow and also build a broader movement for your issue focus. That's, yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Vashti, I hope that responds to your question partly, at least, but that was very helpful information from Corinne. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. If not, we can also ask others to participate. Does anyone have a question? You can raise your hand. I don't see any hands so far, but maybe in the meantime, let me also share a call for proposals that I saw today and might be helpful for you. So if you would like to check that out after the webinar, please do. I posted it in the chat. Given that is the Ending Gender-Based Violence Day, the UN Trust Fund launched a new call. Could be interesting to you. So yeah, check that out as well.
I might also interject for a moment as well.
Yes.
For anybody who would be interested, the Global Queer Youth Network is hosting in December a 2-day activist conference that we are calling the Together Conference. That is for LGBT youth organizations based in Central Asia or Europe. I'll share the link there to you now in a moment. We would love to see anybody who's present here, present in that space. We will be focusing on issue-based activism. And there's a little bit more information on our website that you're welcome to go and have a look at. Please do get in touch if you'd be interested in taking part. The sign-up form is very much open now.
Thank you for sharing, Oscar. It sounds very interesting. Yeah, I will just do a final call for any comments or questions. And yeah, I also see some other news that are shared in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing with others. If there are no further questions, I believe we'll be able to close up a bit earlier. But yeah, please do feel free to raise your hand if you have final burning thoughts. Yeah, I'll give it over to you, Oscar, maybe for the closing.
Sure. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention. Thank you to our partners here at Choice who've led another fantastic session. Looking forward to connecting with all of you in the next couple of weeks and months on our next few sessions and all the things that you are all doing now in the next couple of weeks too. If anybody has any questions about any of this, please feel free to reach out. We will also be in contact with a bit more information from our side and a little bit more contact information. And all the resources that have been shared into this chat and that we've also brought to the space, we'll be sure to share with everyone as well. So other than that, I would just like to thank everyone for your time and attention and your really valuable input. I know it's quite late into the year, so a lot of us are busy planning for our funding strategies for the next year as well. So I really appreciate everyone taking their time out of their day to interact with us here. Again, if anyone has anything that you'd like to connect with us on, please feel free to get in touch. I'll share my email into the chat there in a moment, and then we'll be in touch over email as well with everyone who's participated today. So thank you all for joining us. I shall leave you to the rest of your days. And maybe if Corinne or Hillel, you want to say anything to close off, please go for it. But otherwise, I shall mute myself and leave everyone off to their days. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.